Welcome. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, if that's your thing. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the editor and VP of Streaming Media and the conference chair for another Streaming Media Connect. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to join us as we talk for the next hour about OTT ad tech. We've got 2 more days of sessions after today, tomorrow and Friday. And then we have workshops next week from Streaming Media contributing editors like Jan Ozer, Rob Reinhart, and Sean Lamb, as well as industry technology leaders like Dolby, Millicast, and PTZ Optics, a bunch of other ones that I'm forgetting. So check those out if you get a chance. Before we jump into today's discussion, I do want to thank our Diamond sponsor, Limelight Networks, who is sponsoring all of this week's sessions. Thanks to Limelight Networks. And I would also like to thank the sponsor of this session, Verizon Media, who's Roy Firestone, will be joining us on the panel. And we're going to be talking about, as I said, OTT advertising technology. One of the most easily identifiable trends of the last year or so has been the incredible increase in advertising supported video, whether it's AVOD, whether it's live, fast channels. Advertising has really taken center stage. And with that, so has the technology behind it. As we were talking to our panelists before we kicked off today, it almost seems like maybe things are getting a little bit easier finally, but it's still a pretty complicated landscape. And Nadine Krefitz, the Streaming Media contributing editor, and our panel of all-star experts on the world of advertising technology will lead us through that discussion. So with that, let me hand it over to you, Nadine.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Eric. Today we've got a bunch of different questions that we're going to kind of get to and dig deep in. Obviously, we have people here from a number of the different media companies, but I'll tell you what, we'll go around and introduce ourselves just to start. And I'm going to start with Roy, who is with Verizon. And Roy, why don't you kick it off and just give us a little bit of background on you?
Great. Thanks for having me here. And thanks to the other panelists for joining. I love a chance to geek out and go deep on these topics. I'm the principal product manager of advertising technology at the Verizon Media platform. You know, we bring people more of what they love with these experiences they can't get anywhere else. People are very passionate about their TV. So our platform is currently delivering that at scale. So I have a background in ad tech. I've done exchanges, native, but focusing on video for about 10 years. So I am participating in industry panels like MRC and IAB to sort of get all these standards up to speed for both connected TV and OTT. So very happy to be here today.
Cool, very cool. I'm just going to go in the order of what I'm seeing, and Jared is the next person in my view. Jared.
Jared Wolochinsky, SVP Video Monetization and Operations at Viacom CBS. So it's oversee our sales operations process, integrations, ad tech relationships as it pertains to video on the legacy CBS Interactive side of the house.
Okay. Now, for some weird reason, the order switched, but Tony is going to be the next up. Tony.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tony Brown. I'm Chief of Staff for Newsy. If you're unfamiliar, Newsy is a smaller but up-and-coming news publisher. We started producing short-form, really short-form, 90-second, 2-minute online news videos. And much more recently, we're now in the 24/7 live news game, both on cable and streaming, just about everywhere that you can stream video.
Cool. And Byron, last but not least.
Hey, everybody. I'm Byron Saltysack. Thank you for having me, Nadine and crew. I am with Warner Media and representing brands such as TBS, TNT, Cartoon, CNN, and March Madness is coming up as well. So my role is VP over video and connected devices. So lots on the ad tech side, primarily focused actually on the video side. So this is, I'm planning to learn something today too.
Okay, great. What I love about this is we get to talk about the topics that we've both all kind of thought about, as well as things that come up from the audience. So we may have some audience interaction as well. But I think what I want to start off first asking is, at the scale that you each all support, what has been the weakest link or the biggest problem for you? And I'm just going to let anybody grab this just because we'll start with a free for all here. And if you don't grab it, I just assign it
Can
to
we
one
say
of you.
ad tech in general?
Ad tech in general, that's your problem. Ad tech?
Just if you want to talk about high volume events.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the ad tech has just been the problem. I mean, I thought it was getting kind of easier. No?
I only say this from very recent experience. We
Mhm.
just had a Super Bowl, which is a unique event and
Yes.
isn't in a day-to-day environment, but like ad tech in general, and there's some folks who didn't have problems, but there's a lot that did, can't handle the scale of something that is of a Super Bowl size. It's just
Okay.
their servers are not set up for it. They get crushed in a QPS and it fails. And it
Okay.
did fail.
All right.
A couple weeks ago.
Okay. We're going to go deep into what you wanted, into what your environment was like in a few minutes. Now, the thing is that Byron, both you and Tony are still also delivering ads at different scales. What about you? What has been, the thing that to you has been the weakest link?
One of the things I was going to mention is, and I didn't think of this when we were talking about, has it gotten easier or harder? One of the things that's changed in the last 5 years has been or however long, the move from Flash over to HTML5.
Mhm.
And with that, there's a lot of nice things, but with Flash, you were really targeting a single platform. So one of the weak links for us has been, now you're talking mobile web, you're talking desktop web, across 4 different browsers, and they all are very different beasts. So something will happen on Safari, something will be different on Edge. You really have to treat all of these. There is no web the way there used to be. It really is, 4 different browsers, times mobile and desktop.
So even if you're doing server side, you're still having a lot of issues with specific platforms.
Well, I think, we're doing server side, but we're still doing a lot of client side beaconing, which I think we'll get to, add some complexity there. That's the area where there's still a lot to work out individually on each platform.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Tony, you and your scale, I mean, you're in a bunch of different environments too. So you have the benefit or the disadvantage to being where you're digital, your broadcast. What do you say about Newsy?
We're video, and we're video in all forms that it comes. But I'm going to echo. I'm going to take the easy way out and echo Jared and Byron. I mean, my challenges are ad tech and all the moving pieces. So it's it's all the different platforms that we have to support to be able to reach the audience that we want. It's the stratification that we're seeing in audience across all of CTV. It's the way that we function, which is largely programmatic, and as a smaller company with a much smaller sales force than some of the folks on this panel. We deal largely open market, which adds all kinds of additional variables and variability to our business. So for us, often it feels a little bit more like firefighting than anything strategic, but that's really the biggest challenge that we have is because we're smaller, we're playing a lot more catch up.
Okay. Roy, these are all your potential or existing customers now.
We won't tip the hand, but so with scale, I think the big challenge, I think if we generically say ad tech, is how do you make it fault tolerant and redundant? How do you make sure that you have features like fallback ads where if something goes wrong, getting from one place, you've got another one as a backup or more. And so, for scale, I use a reference of one of our sports finals. We do a lot of live events, over 100 a year, 100 a year. It's crazy. But when you include every game and match that we spin up. So we're all cloud-based, and we have the concept of auto scaling. And in one of the sports finals, we had over 2 million viewers concurrently on the platform. And we stitched 20 million ads into those streams and then fired over 200 million tracking event beacons, all within the 3 hours of that one sporting event. And to Jared's point, in order to do that, over the years, we built that competency, but you need a lot of monitoring, alerting, ops, personnel, eyes on glass, everything that goes along with, sort of a TV model. You got to bring the best of what folks did for the reliability in the TV to get to 5 nines in digital.
Okay. And now, so Jared brought up ad tech. What specifically? Let's have like just exact examples of, and you're not doing obviously a Super Bowl every day, fortunately for you.
Yeah, I mean, when I say like ad tech and like when we're talking about the failing issues, and I think it's what Roy just mentioned, it's like half of ad tech is probably on AW East, and no one thinks about it. And I think it's because when an outage like that happens, you see like everything go down, whatnot. So it's the TV like thought process of your fallback to your fallback. Like it just needs to work. We have a way to go in internet land to be there, and even to linear scale. I mean, it was like 5 and change million concurrents on the digital side. TV was still like 90+ million. We're not even like scratching the surface on like linear scale, and we're still having problems. So we've got some work to do. In a normal day-to-day world or a day, it's like, for news or just, standard full episodes, I think things are in much better conditions, and especially a lot of people have adopted to the server side thought process, and things coming from trusted vendors or stitchers, and beacons might be fired from the client, might be fired from the server. I think things have exponentially gotten better over the years in terms of those tracking and all the vendors dealing with the publisher methods. Okay,
so you're talking first redundancy, and that just needs to be solidly redundant, put it that way. Now, say we've solved the redundancy problem, okay? Because I'm sure that next time somebody will think more about that, right? So you've got the redundancy. Then what's next? Is it the beaconing that's the biggest problem? Is it being able? No, the beaconing's easy.
I don't think that's the next biggest problem we have.
Okay. All right. In fact, why don't we expand this conversation, because it won't just, be about the Super Bowl. But Byron, for you, if you think about something that you're doing, like where are your problems being generated? Is it?
Well, what I was going to say on the ad tech side is one of the things that's interesting about ad tech is that it really is an ecosystem of a lot of different vendors, partnerships, and all of that happening. So when an ad hits and beacons do fire for a particular ad that everyone is seeing at the same time, then that vendor that's collecting their viewability information or whatnot is getting slammed at that moment. And then the next part of the chain gets slammed. So when you talk about solving the redundancy, it's not a single, I want to solve the redundancy the way you might for if I was running my own website and I owned all of the tech, because it's really this whole system. Everybody has to solve the redundancy. They have to solve scale. Every single part of that chain has to be. So I think that's part of the area that needs focus as well.
Okay, so we won't just solve redundancy then. But Roy, you said that you're handling, an excessive amount of beaconing. So you've got the measurement, but really, the measurement, are you at that same time also doing a lot of the personalization, or is it an instance where people want to get the same ads?
No, this is for dynamic ad insertion with real-time ad decisioning. So if it's a live feed, an upcoming ad break, say 20 seconds out, we'll start ad processing in the cloud, working with all those vendor partners that are part of the customer's ecosystem. But regardless of where it comes from, I did an audit once where it was over 100 different places that the ad creative could come from.
Mhm.
And because we're the SSAI stitcher, it's our system that's trying to consume all the creative. And the reason that we're doing that, we're not greedy. We need to make sure that the viewer gets into a commercial break and back to content in a consistent lean back experience, and that the ad quality of the video matches the content. So on our platform, it's going all through the same encoding, storage and delivery mechanism. So when it comes out the other end and we're measuring all of that advertising, we are in fact firing all. That's how we get 100-to-1 ratio of a viewer to amount of beacons, because we've collected all the third-party participants tracking information and then fire them, at the appropriate time. So that's not an easy thing to pull off. And with redundancy, we're into multiple technologies, multiple cloud is an example, where there's an evolution of the platform into bigger investment areas where we have a lot more robustification going on.
Okay. Now, in fact, when I think about just the ad delivery, I mean, there's like a stock market transaction going on in order to get the ad. Is that where the problem happens? Or is it more that there's a multi-platform environment that has to be kind of fulfilled? Or is it the measurement side of things? Like, what's the biggest issue there?
Well, there's a lot of fingers in the pie. So maybe Jared or Byron, you can speak to these business models, but we have to support, is this a national ad break or a local ad break? Is this an affiliate ad opportunity? And once you start handing off the ad opportunities, based on business rules, then it gets a little hairier. Then it's outside of just the content owner's video ad server. And now it's coming from somewhere else that you may not have direct organizational influence over. Can you guys speak to that?
I think, just to boil it to the most simple thing, it's like at the end of the day, there's a fan sitting there watching your content. They go to break, they see a commercial, they need to get out of the break and get back to content. The actual quality of that ad creative, and I think, we've made advance, IAB, 3.0, we went to 4.0 and 4.1, and, we're progressing on that. There's the ad format guidelines, mezzanine files, concept like ad ID, creative identifiers. It's like, I think, Roy, as you just put it, as you go from national to local, or, resellers, you're like, oh, there's so many different people selling inventory. Those standards of a TV-like experience, a high-quality mezzanine file with standardized audio levels and peaks and that QC control, it's still the Wild West when it comes to that end user. And you get super loud ads, you get quiet ads, you get letterbox ads. I think we're still battling the basics to be a TV-like experience in general.
Okay.
As an ecosystem, I think, clearly Viacom, CBS, we don't do that. We do everything perfect. But in general, I think it's a challenge when you don't control that end tag with that supply that's coming from a DSP that's been quadrupled encoded and, and down encoded and whatnot.
Tony, you had a thought?
Yeah, I think kind of coming back to the redundancy piece on that, and the fact that all of this has to happen in fractions of a second, it really kind of underpins the fact that this is the wild west, and it in many cases has a negative effect on the overall user experience. If you have a 30-second ad that doesn't come back or doesn't come back in time, and that break in a live stream is going to viewers, they're going to see 30 seconds of slate or 30 seconds of promo, and it could be a promo that they've already seen in a previous break. It's I just want to underline how far we are from, in some cases, from actually replicating what people are used to on television sometimes.
I would just jump in and say that the other side of the coin is we don't have that TV-like experience, but it also, the way that we're able to do things enables us to have some of these, longer tail offerings that we can turn up. Roy was talking about 100,000 different sporting events. Like you couldn't broadcast that much. Like I don't know how many channels you would need to broadcast that. So the fact that we're able to do this stuff, we might not have the same amount of redundancy. I think that's part of the challenge is we have both of these small use cases, and then we have the large mega use cases that we need to somehow cover both.
Okay.
And the other thing I was going to just add in there is the life cycle for TV is from a hardware perspective is about 7 years. That's how often people buy new televisions. Devices, new versions of browsers, operating systems, these come out a couple times a year, right? So it's just a much more inherently unstable foundation that we're building on as well.
Okay. I'm going to insert one of the questions that we've had come up in the chat window, and we're talking about the measurement issue here. So the question is the DAI ad stitcher often proxy for an ad that was stitched in? Is this adequate for tracking ad impressions, or is it explicit beaconing mandatory from a player client as it is actually processes ad segments? So realistically, Roy, why don't you talk to this a little bit, since we earlier mentioned something about this?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. We're almost there as an industry. I'm familiar with the Media Ratings Council count on begin to render mandate. So we definitely want to be accurate that ads are seen by people or available on a screen to be seen by people. That's what they mean by begin to render. So in order to make that happen, we've got all these technologies of streaming manifest delivery to HLS and Dash together with ad tech. And the systems that are in between need a new accredited metric. So that does not exist at the IAB yet, but we're headed there. So we want to have a server-side ad insertion beacon metric that is accredited, auditable, and certifiable, that we can call an impression. So I think several of us were probably involved in a scramble last year, sort of recategorize server-side beaconed activity, not in the impressions, but maybe as tracked ads or something else. And so the long-term solution to that is to have something robust and auditable, so that we can call it an impression, even if it was fired from the server. So just to clarify the question that came in, yes, we do still fire server-side impression beacons that are trusted by all of our partners, but that is not an accredited thing yet until we get that through the industry bodies.
Okay. Does anybody else want to mention something about this? I have a question that's moving on to a different area, but does anyone else want to talk about measurement before we leave to the next question? No, okay. So we talked a little bit about the privacy regulations and how that is impacting advertising. So essentially, with some of the new regulations coming in, unless you're a registered viewer, it's harder to do targeting. So how has this affected your workflow, or how has this affected your ability to then do personalized ad serving? And anybody in the media companies here can speak to this, although I'm really thinking that Byron wants to talk about it first, but who's going to grab their mic?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, what you're seeing is from a ad delivery perspective, you need a way to identify a user. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the traffic that we get is for anonymous users, and there are legitimate reasons that you want to be able to identify that user. Things, as we mentioned, you don't want a user to see the same ad over and over. So we need a way to track them to some degree. We have all of this movement in the industry around privacy and consumer empowerment and consumer data protection. I think that's all really helpful. But one of the ways that it affects us is we're starting to see changes in the operating systems. Apple is coming out with their changes to the IDFA, and that's creating a bit of a scramble on our side to figure out what is the mechanism by which we are going to identify the user for those legitimate use cases.
Okay. Tony, what are your thoughts? Are you looking at, changing your workflow in order to support the new privacy laws, or are you put it this way, are your viewers registered generally to see their content?
So we are mostly anonymous users, and that is one of the hurdles that we're facing as a business and looking at in how we address this, because we have the same problem. We need to be able to identify them in some way, but we don't know exactly how we're going to do that long term. And so we're working on strategies there, but it's far from a clear picture forward.
Okay. It's a toss up between Jared or Roy. Who wants to answer first?
Go for it, Jared.
As aware, our subscription product that will be launched on March 4th. Shameless plug. Viacom CBS is a big company. You have Pluto, which is is no login required. In which case I think very similar to anonymous users. And as you lose device IDs, solving for that identity is clearly going to be, I think a challenge, but luckily we all have the same challenge. And then on the other end of the spectrum, something like CBS All Access, or and Paramount Plus, where we have 100% registration coverage. We have email, we have our own ID, our own identity to that, where, some data sources, which are going to be are more dependent on like a device ID, third-party data that you have to buy, or it's old cookie, the old data cookie stuff you used to buy. I think some of that's going to be a challenge, but I think getting folks to register, whether it is a subscription or not, is gonna, I think everyone on this call would agree, everyone's gonna double down on trying to find ways to get people to register from a product standpoint, because that identity link is going to be extremely important to do any of that audience-based targeting. I still think content is under talked, people forget how much activity is still bought based on content targeting, and that kind of alignment, and not necessarily some in-market and tender data segment. So there's still and there's safety in that, because those signals aren't going to go away.
Right. I like that you mentioned, content targeting versus audience targeting. I think the great promise of digital was, ultimately we can craft one ad for one person and do that for everybody at scale. But I'm not sure we ever really wanted to do that. So the traditional TV models of sort of a show as a proxy for people, or not, as a proxy for a demo or an age, I think will continue. So we got to support both of those tracks of signaling. I think this new era of subscription signed in, there's another dimension, which is just consent. So even if the user's anonymous, they're still going to have to complete a consent prompt. We do want to, convince people that it's a good bargain to make. This is high quality content. We're providing it to you for subscription free. And we want to make sure that the ads you see are things that you might be interested in. Marketer messages want to resonate with people, but people also don't want to see products that they have no intention of buying or that they don't have any affinity with. So I think there's a happy middle where, we balance the privacy and consent. Obviously, the framework is going to be important to support technologically, but where do we marry audience versus content signals so that marketers can continue to open those wallets and get more money in digital in general?
We're getting a lot of questions here, so let me pick up a few of them, and then we can go back to our regularly scheduled conversation. So let's see here. What do you see, this is from Evan Roberts, what do you see as the longevity of user data usefulness. For example, I let someone watch with me and they are interested in a product I will never want ads for. When will that disappear for the viewer? Is that something any of you can speak to?
Well, what about co-viewing? Jared was saying, even with a signed in account, we still have to solve for family viewing and co-viewing. And there's a wider adoption of the profile concept, the viewer profile, so that my anime loving sons don't cloud my, continue watching title scroll. Where do we sit there as well?
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking earlier that I'll sign up for a subscription as long as I can remove things that don't want to be advertised anymore. So maybe there's a curation piece of solutioning this longevity of data issue.
Okay. So, we have a lot of different questions coming in. I'm going to do a few more questions from the audience, just so that since we have all of you here and you're available to talk. The anonymous attendee asks, CTV content streaming is at 5 nines reliability, but advertising isn't. Does ad tech, the Stitcher, the real-time auction need to move to the CDN to pull off the 5 nines in CTV advertising delivery? I'm thinking that's a question for you, Roy.
Well, we already do that. I mentioned that we have to onboard every single advertising creative to the same platform where we host and deliver content. So I think that's an advantage. But in terms of programmatically, we support a lot of programmatic offerings, including conducting a pre-bid auction to get ads. Ultimately, we believe the control should still be within the content owner's primary ad server. So even if we pass in a bunch of bidded ads and you've got direct sold and you've got fallbacks, the ad decisioning system should still optimize the pod and come back with the best results for the viewer. And that model isn't consistent across all streams right now. Some people are plugging in programmatic and it's road blocking other ads, or maybe they're implementing some waterfall steps, legacy waterfall mentality, where they might be losing opportunity. So I think it's a matter of, being agnostic and integrating with everybody and doing as much fair auction and programmatic as you can, but ultimately passing it to the publisher control for optimization.
Okay. Now, when we talked in our planning session, I asked if you guys had questions for each other, and I know that you did. So I want to give us a little bit of time here now to ask the questions of each other that you had. So I'm thinking, Byron, you had a question, I believe, earlier we discussed, and it was more related to, what Jared found as the big issue. But why don't I let you phrase it?
I have a new question now.
Okay, go ahead.
So one of the questions I saw in the Q&A was around, would there be a tool, a QC tool that could potentially help in this area? I don't know that's, there's anything, it's not really like the quality of ads generally that bites us. It's all the pieces coming together. What the question I would have for anyone here is around, what are your QA processes like generally? Because one of the challenges we have are all the beacons firing, is everything working? These are things that are happening on the network layer. They're very hard to see. So it really takes an expert to verify that everything is going correctly. And it's a very intensive process. So I don't know if you all do use any tools, vendors that help you in this space, because that would be very, very interesting to me.
I love the fact that all four of us shook our heads and said, yeah. Okay.
About to open up a role in that team actually very soon. Yeah, it's right now, it is very manual. The Stitcher we use kind of unlocks some of the stuff that happens server side via like unique IDs, and we have easy tools to go about it. But definitely share the sentiment with you as Paramount Plus is coming up in less than 2 weeks, and it's on every single platform, and you have logged in, not logged in, profiles, kids, we have like so many different variations for testing. Automation is desperately needed to kind of be in like ad call structures, tracking firing, all those requirements. Share that sentiment that it's a challenge. So hopefully someone has a tool that we could both use.
Yeah, I think we're still in the product life cycle, in the growth period. Like we're past the introductory phase where we've made commercials work on digital. They're actually showing now and they're delivering at scale. Now we've got ad-supported video working. Now we're past the make it work, we need to make it better. And that's a primary area of focus. We've got ad data products that both live within our UIs, but then we find that the larger operators are getting very savvy with data, and they can consume sort of more real-time things from our APIs, or they can get log delivery on a cadence to do more like look back analysis. But all of this is a prime area for investment, and we're continuing to evolve that with the sensitivity of live operations. All those hooks are in there for real-time monitoring, alerting, and triggers for escalation. Whether I like it or not, I'm actually on the lists for a lot of P0, P1, and I see them all. So whether I'm watching the game or not, I'm seeing what's happening and how things are being proactively addressed. But it's a very complex problem to solve. And I think data tools, interoperability of data tools is a key concept, so that we can support like, oh yeah, log into our UI, but like how many people are going to do that? If we can integrate our data API into your monitoring system, that's probably going to be a quicker win in the short run until we get through this massive growth period and start to consolidate around new standards for that.
So if the data tool, what's the data path? Which problem is the data tool passing data on?
Well, it's near real time. So, if something is, oh gosh, we have both our streaming stack, but we also have the delivery, we have the CDN. So, I mean, it's very sophisticated in the routing of traffic and, having all that redundancy in the cloud, moving things around so that no matter what, those streams don't go down. So we have key metrics around things like rebuffering rate. And that's very closely, it's like the pulse of the system. And as soon as there's even a quiver in the pulse, someone's taking action and figuring out how to remediate. So that's just one example. You have to know your KPIs in this streaming space and then instrument around them.
So Jared and Tony, we haven't heard from either one of you, so I'll let you kind of chime in on this if you have more comments, or we can move on to another question.
I'll just say we have the same need. And probably opening myself up to emails from vendors, but
you bet. Okay. Jared?
We have a vendor in place for the QoS and that stuff.
Okay. People are now going to ask me to say.
They know who they're talking. They know who they are. They're probably watching.
Okay. All right. Are there other questions that you each wanted to ask of the other that we haven't kind of touched on yet? I know the Super Bowl, we kind of were all interested, Jared, to hear a little bit more about, what went on, or what you think, what was the biggest success for you? Put it that way.
On that one, it worked. Stream quality was great. Our at least our primary ad tracking pieces of it did not have the ad tech problems because it was well prepared, and it did not have any issues. So from that standpoint, hundreds and hundreds of millions of impressions, and and no streaming issues. So that was by far the big success, and we did it remotely. We all did it via Zooms for 9+ months.
Very cool.
I think it's amazing that we were able to do that across the board against every single division in the company to do that.
We have a question to Byron, and I don't know, Byron, if you have an answer for this, but the question is from David Barden. How had merging legacy Xandr with legacy Warner Media evolved Warner Media's go-to-market as tech? So I think really what the question is you've got data and technology from two different companies as you merge, and many of you have had the same issues going forward. You know, what are some of the best practices that you came up with when you had to merge two, or at least different technologies?
I'm going to give a non-answer on that because I think by design, there's a pretty strong firewall between Warner Media and Xandr. So I have met with them, and there's interest in using some of their new ad tech. They have SDK, you know, some new features I think that are kind of interesting that we want to involve that aren't just, you know, mid-roll, pre-roll. But I'm not really that involved in the Xandr side of the house.
Okay. I'm going to move on to something that we also talked about previously, which was there are some media companies that are very challenged about moving to the cloud, moving certain aspects of their workflow to the cloud. But ad tech essentially has always been cloud driven. So, you know, what advice do you folks have for other areas of streaming as opposed to help them kind of move their other services into cloud delivery? Because each of you have had to do this, including obviously designing the platforms, Roy, but you've all done this and it's working for you. You know, I know that, you know, all of you have had issues with ad tech, and that's to be expected when you're merging this many types of technologies and functions together. But really, you know, if you think about, again, what your successes were, what can you point out to people who are going to be further moving other parts of their workflow into the cloud?
Well, I got to give a shout out to the engineering side of our house where, you know, they're constantly leaning into new technologies. So being quick at just the tech competency matters. You know, with technologies like Kubernetes and, you know, whether we're talking about streaming data now, we talked about data products earlier. There's a new way to push data around. You can stream it, like not streaming as in streaming TV, but data streaming. So we encourage folks to keep adopting newer and better ways. I mean, there's always a way to like lift and shift existing broadcast stuff, you know, like program scheduling or, you know, SCUDdy triggers. You can get that stuff digitized in Flow, but there's a native digital capability. You get a lot more. You get a lot more availability of data. You get a lot more sort of points of data to learn from. So leaning into that and investing more into that, I think is core. And it comes mainly from the engineering side of the house to adopt that posture early on to be successful in the cloud.
You're also really dealing with, I mean, you have the ad transactional part of this, and you have a lot of other things that are going on. So I don't know that there's other parts of streaming that have this kind of complexity. People are going to now bombard me in the chat saying that there is, but realistically, sorry,
my
Brian?
advice was in that area was going to be, you know, build it up in layers. Don't try to, you know, replicate everything immediately. Definitely, I agree with Roy. Don't lift and shift. Try to use some of the services as they, you know, take the opportunity to redesign. But as you're doing that, do small increments as where it makes sense. Get a stream running, or, you know, get clipping working, and then get VOD working, and then get live working, and then get ads working. You know, like build it up over time and not try to do everything at once.
I guess we also, I mean, I didn't say this to start, but most of the issues we're all talking about are live streaming. And so VOD is obviously different, but we're realistically talking about kind of ad delivery for live. And so because we're talking about live, what happens? I mean, are people still sticking with the 15 and 30s? Are they doing something different? Jared, how's your timing been?
I mean, I mean, like we have 2 minutes to fill. Is it one 2-minute ad, 260s, 430s? You know, you see every flavor out there, and I think for the most part, most people are taking longer ads. I think where things get tricky, especially in a live environment, is when someone wants a 6 or a 10 or something like that, that doesn't necessarily conform to kind of that 15-second increment concept. And like, I mean, God forbid you have a 60-second break and you get what, 10 sixes. No one wants that. So I think some of these other lengths or executions that are born out of a pre-roll kind of VOD experience are going to be hard to translate into a traditional ad pod experience. Double boxes, you see it on NFL, you see it on PGA Tour, where you might get a 6-second ad, but it's more of a double box thing. And there's companies out there that do that, like Transmit Live, and other guys are really experimenting with those double boxes, which have a place in it. Just sometimes they're difficult to pull off technically. When you have, you go back to the whole HTML5 and you got 10 different platforms, and this one can do it, and this old version can't, and this one can. Like it's difficult to scale, but nonetheless, still in the wild today.
Okay. Tony, were you going to say something, or was I also cut myself off about the cloud conversation? So if somebody else wanted to add more to the cloud conversation, we can do that, or we can move on. Cloud advice, best practices. All right, we'll move on. So, we talked a little bit more about the questions you guys would ask each other, but we haven't really delved into the CTV strategies. Now, there are certain things about CTV that are different. The measurements, the ability to go out and kind of sell across all environments. What, if you're looking at your specific CTV strategy, what have you had to do to adjust for delivering on that platform?
I mean, I wanted to say, like, if you follow the standards and you had a good stitcher in place, you really didn't have to change much.
Right.
It's fast, uses a device ID, server side stitching is same on a Roku as it is on an iPhone as it is on desktop. So ideally, you didn't have to do anything. So I mean, at least that's been my.
What about personalization and cookies?
There's no difference between a Roku and an iPhone. It's a device ID. Now, whether or not you have a device graph, or you can tie back to a Rita or a Tizen ID or a IDFA on Apple TV, any of those, it's no different than mobile.
Okay.
I think we learned those lessons in mobile. I mean, I started out in web players, full first run episodes, like with Viacom doing Jersey Shore, and you would get that ad supported first run the week it aired online for free. We learned all this with the browsers. It used to be, oh my gosh, browsers. And then it was, oh my gosh, there's iOS versus Android. Now we have to do everything twice. Well, now with CTV, what's really driving more folks towards server-side approaches is the fragmented device ecosystem. I mean, we see, primarily Roku and Amazon devices taking up about 60% of delivery. And then there's a really long tail of others. So it's not even feasible to do the work client side once or twice. And with smart TVs, you can't just push a software build. That's not even technically feasible. So you're not going to have 100% coverage client side. So, this move towards the server side approach is get your content onboarded once and it'll deliver everywhere. And the more folks that sort of take that mindset, including syndication. So that, you're delivering to your own apps and to your own channels on these devices and platforms, but ideally you want it to go out to social or wherever else you need it to syndicate right from the same place. You don't want to have to re-encode your whole library or somehow do a dance between, glass to glass to get a live event out. You just want it all in one place and out the door.
Yeah,
okay.
And then you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's how we've succeeded with CBSN or CBS Sports HQ or TTC live channels. I mean, it is, when we try to do distribution, is like, here's our stream. We'll take care of the ads. We'll take care of the beaconing server side. Be like, just take it. You're going to thank us. It's going to be 100 times easier than doing signal acquisition, ad integration, testing, and whatnot.
So when you're sending out your stream, are then you allowing people to actually replace some of the ads within the stream, or are you just getting the same stream sent out or the same ads being viewed?
No, I mean, that's with at least the way we've taken it with with Google DAI, and that's currently our Stitcher is, it's all personal to that exact endpoint. That user is getting their ads, and it's totally dynamic in that nature. It's not like a Super Bowl where it's a one-to-many. It's always a one-to-one scenario.
Right. Okay. I have a question from the audience, which is, what novel ad technology solutions / innovations are you looking forward to and or tracking at your respective companies?
I can lay back because I don't want to seem like I'm selling my stuff.
You mean from a consumer side or from does it?
I think this sounds like potentially a question from a vendor who is interested in figuring out where they want to go in the market. So what novel ad technology solutions are you looking forward to or tracking? So, put it this way, Jared earlier talked about automation. Is this the most important thing to you? Is it the kind of cross-silo data?
I think the stuff that Roy talked about earlier that he's working on, I have to follow up with him later and make sure I'm staying in touch, but where we can move things completely to the server side and get all of the metrics there and not have to do server side with client side beacons. From a tech side, that's most exciting for me, because then it's just like Jared explained, is you're handing off a stream and there's really little for the device to do at that point. That's really exciting.
Okay. Now, though right now you have to do client-side beaconing, and that's in order to, Jared's shaking his head, in order to assure the measurements. Not that you can or can't, but in order for the measurements to go through correctly.
At least I know for, go ahead, Brian.
No, I was waiting for you to jump in.
Gotcha. At least I know Google, and not to name vendors, but their server side beaconing on live, I think, is MRC accredited in terms of like how they do it. And it works. We very little discrepancies, doing the X4 to 4 header stuff correct. So I mean, you get that dance right. Server side beaconing is absolutely in the wild today, and recorded properly, on probably a good chunk of all of us have a piece of it.
Okay. We have another question here, but before I get to the question, what I want to say is that, in the several years that I've been working on this topic, it sounds to me, just like Eric said earlier, that at least it's gotten a little bit easier. There's still a lot of technical challenges. And that's mostly just the nature of how this works, because there's just a lot of parts to it. But I'm no longer having the conversation with you, are you doing client versus server side? I mean, that's an old conversation, and fortunately it's evolved. And I'm sure if we had this conversation in 6 months, it would be different again. The question from the audience is, what's the best download technology for AVOD? So I'm going to assume that they're looking at, AVOD advertising, and they need to kind of have a workflow designed.
Yeah. I don't know the solution for this. I'm excited to hear the answer too.
Yeah, so I'm like, this is pretty advanced stuff. We're helping partners do this. It is considered an innovation area. So some call it, the concept is download to go. So we're talking about, okay, so if I'm online and I download a show that's ad supported, I'm going to play it back whenever offline on a plane or, not on the internet. And then when I reconnect, all the advertising beacons need to get sent up and everybody needs to get paid for the advertising that rendered. There isn't one vendor or technology that's being implemented. I'm part of a lot of sort of cross-functional teams that are helping make that happen. but it is an interesting area. Everyone in the ecosystem needs to play nice and say, oh, I know these late beacons are coming and they're not fraud, and make sure that it's all wired up and tokenized and secure. But that's a great functional area that we're still innovating in.
I believe I wrote about Panthera,
I was
and
just gonna say, we know that that is available and an option. I think, Roy, to your point though, we don't do it. We've looked into it because we do have, download a full episode, watch it on a plane. When you come back to your Wi-Fi, start firing, tracking like crazy. But I do, there are complications on IVT or flooding in too quick at once. But you have to think of a whole industry that does this today. Podcasts. There's solutions out there. And I know there are some big video vendors that I think do let you download with advertising. But I think it is in the minority of views at this point.
Okay. We're almost out of time. Questions that have come up from the audience have been very interesting, and I think it shows that there's a lot of interest in this. The one thing that comes to my mind is that I know that in 6 months, these are going to be different conversations. And so I think that this is a constantly, very interesting and evolving technology, at least for me on the outside looking in. Is there anything that you guys want to wrap up by saying that you are thinking about you'd like to see in the next 6 months happen? And I'll start off with Roy because Roy's not muted.
I'm still pushing for this new accredited server-side metric, that doesn't require client-side code everywhere to be compliant. So that's my one thing that I'm going to see over the longer term of a 6-month frame. Be looking for white papers and some data to back up that approach. Okay,
cool. Tony, how about you? What have you been thinking about for the next 6 months you'd like to see?
I'm wondering when some of the the programmatic ad tech is actually going to make its way into content. So if I've got a dynamic playlist of content, when can I start illustrating on screen when viewer A is going to see this piece of video next, and viewer B is going to see this video next. I'd love to see that kind of start to make its way out.
That sounds cool. Jared, you're next.
Trying to do a lot more around AI and machine learning on content signals, especially in live. So we're working on some stuff now to get some great signals and introduce that into the ecosystem.
Okay, Byron, we're going to give you the last comment again. What would you like to talk about?
I think one thing just from a consumer perspective would be and I don't know if this will be in 6 months, but the innovation that will happen around ads from a consumer standpoint, getting away from interruptive ads to, what can we do differently there? I think that'll be pretty exciting to see as that evolves.
We didn't even touch on the ad content, and that's in part because the technology takes enough of our time here. Definitely interesting conversations. I'm sure we'll get back to it. Eric, thank you. We have had an interesting conversation, and hopefully people have learned something. There's 1 or 2 questions that came up we didn't get a chance to answer, but we'll try to get to them offline.
Yes, we will. We will save those questions and forward them to the speakers. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nadine, for being such a terrific moderator and guiding the conversation so expertly. We all appreciate that. And for those of you who are going to be joining us again, we'll be back tomorrow with another full day of panels. I'd like to thank our sponsor for this session, Verizon Media, as well as Limelight Networks, who is sponsoring all of Streaming Media Connect this week. And with that, I'll be signing off, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Great. Thanks very much. Goodbye.